So this is one of my favorite presentations, and why are we cleaning no clean? And the reason it's one of my favorite presentations is that's probably the most common question I get asked in the industry that I am in, is why are we cleaning no clean? It says no clean on the label. So what's the reason we're cleaning it? So we're gonna get into that. For those who have been on my webinars in the past, or perhaps some workshops, or have heard me speak, you'll know I like to kind of go back in time so I can put things into perspective. So we're gonna get into our time machine and we're gonna go back in time, and to put that time in context, once upon a time, we cleaned all circuit boards. I don't know how many of you remember those days. The younger people probably have never experienced cleaning circuit boards. And perhaps people who are more senior remember the time when we cleaned pretty much all circuit boards. But that's the time we're going back to. And that time is 1989. And I love to put things in perspective. So if we can just play for a little bit in these crazy times, 1989 was the time of the Yugo, which sold for just under $4,000, probably the world's worst car. You got what you paid for. But anyway, that was 1989. The three hit songs of 1989 were Chicago's Look Away, and then of course every rose has its thorn. Poison sang that, and Paula Abdul was singing Straight Up. Those were the popular songs in 1989. If you remember 1989, you may recall that the average income per year was about $27,000. The average home was under $100,000. If you were a renter, you paid about $420 a month on average for your rental apartment. And the average price for a new car was under $12,000, and it cost less than $1 a gallon for gasoline. That's just to put 1989 in perspective. And the public internet as we know it today was still 2 years away. And this, most importantly, this is what our technology looked like in 1989. This is a pretty representative sample. Surface mount was being discussed. The acronym had been produced, but there was very little surface mount in the way we know it today. Most of the technology, component technology on circuit assemblies was through-hole. And this is a very typical technology layout and density layout and component selection of a board made in that time period. Well, something else occurred during that time period, and it was so dramatic for our industry that it really put the electronics industry into two separate eras. One era was before 1989, and one was after 1989. And before 1989, we cleaned almost every board, very few exceptions. Boards were generally cleaned, and they were cleaned normally in 1,1,1-trichloroethane or Freon TMS or some generic equivalent of that. They were mostly solvent clean. There was some water cleaning going on if you were using an organic acid flux, but for the most part, the fluxes were RMAs and the cleaning was solvent-based. And then after 1989, the predominant conventional wisdom was to use a no-clean flux and not remove the flux. And what caused that? For those who remember, it was this. It was the Montreal Protocol, which was a treaty signed in Montreal, Canada, to eliminate ozone depletion. We live in a bunch of environmental buzzwords. Today, the environmental buzzword is climate change. Not long ago, it was global warming. And before that, it was ozone depletion. And this was in the era of ozone depletion concerns. And the United States and 10 other countries, 11 countries total, signed a treaty in Montreal which would eliminate the manufacturing of chlorinated fluorocarbons, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, over a 10-year period. So by 1999, there would be no more of these cleaning solvents available to use. And that was a big thing. In fact, not only did 11 countries sign on to the original treaty, it was the only treaty ratified by every UN nation country. Actually, there's 2 treaties ratified by every UN nation country. One was the Geneva Convention and the other one was the Montreal Protocol. There has never been more than 2 treaties ratified by every single country. Today we live in a very polarized political climate, so I don't think we can ever agree with every country on everything ever again, but back then we did. That was an important technology or an important treaty. So there was a 10-year phase out, and we kind of had an implied contract with No Clean, and that was that the residues would be invisible and the residues would be benign. So we didn't see residue, which is good. And if there was invisible residue on the assembly, it would not be harmful. It would be benign. That was the implied contract we had with No Clean, and that worked for a long, long time.